Hello and welcome to this very special edition of The Chosen One. Urjit Patel is going to be India's 24th RBI governor, and as he takes charge early next month as the new boss of Mint Street, what do we expect from Dr. Patel? What are the challenges that await him? We get you a special lineup to discuss all of that and a lot more on the legacy that Rajan leaves behind, and where does Urjit Patel pick up things from. We've got Adi Godrej, chairman of Godrej Industries, Sajjid, Chinoy, economist JP Morgan, Samiran Chakraborty, chief economist Citibank, and of course Rajiv Kumar, senior fellow at CPR, and the man who was in the panel that selected Urjit Patel as the next boss of Mint Street. Thank you very much, each one of you, for being with us. And all of you, if I may begin with you, Dr. Kumar, because you were a part of the selection process that ensured that Urjit Patel was indeed the chosen one. What is, I mean, 24 hours done, we are done with hyperventilation, we're done with all the then and now analysis. What is the big signal that one should read out of Urjit Patel's appointment? Dr. Kumar.
I think there are, Supriya, in my mind, there are two very strong signals that are sent out by the government, which selected Urjit Patel from a panel that we had recommended. And I think the first of that is that they would like to assure the investor community, as well as the both domestically and abroad, that India is serious about keeping inflation in control and macro stability, and retain macro stability going forward. I think that's one, and which in effect means that they will maintain the continuity in policies, and there will be no sudden switches in policy, and therefore a degree of predictability is being introduced in the policy regime, which I think is very useful, very laudable. So that's the first signal. And the second signal I think that the government wants to convey is that they want a team player, which does away, as far as possible, this whole business of RBI versus North Block or RBI versus the government, etc. And I say that because Urjit, as you know, has been a consultant, effectively economic advisor in the Ministry of Finance. He had succeeded me, I think, 3 years down the road, in 95 to 98, working in the Department of Economic Affairs. So he knows how the government works. He knows, he's been an insider there. And along with this, I think because of his stint in the private sector, which has been a fairly long stint in the private sector in different capacities, the government sees in him somebody who brings those concerns to monetary policy, and bank regulation aspects of the RBI, to assure, as it were, that real economic concerns would also be taken care of with Urjit there in command of the CEO of the RBI. So those are the signals that I think the government wanted to convey in selecting Urjit Patel as the next governor of the RBI.
Mr. Godrej, if I may bring the same question to you and actually take that line of communication forward, that everyone is hailing continuity, and Dr. Kumar is right in saying that there is a sense of predictability that the government wanted to get in as far as macroeconomic scenarios is concerned. There's a sense of continuity that one wanted. But does Urjit Patel's appointment also not validate RBI's own policy till now, particularly under Governor Rajan, or RBI's policy at large?
Yes, to a certain extent, certainly. But I think he was also an excellent candidate. One, he is RBI experienced right now. He's a deputy governor. He is very well qualified for the position. He has worked in the private sector. He has worked in the government. He's worked in the international agencies. He has the right experience for this position, and it will lead to continuity. So I'm very glad that he has been appointed the next governor.
So, Samiran Chakraborty, I want to bring this to you. And the obvious question that one would want to ask is that continuity has been maintained and there is a sense of predictability as far as macroeconomy is concerned. But, both Governor Rajan and now the incoming governor, Dr. Patel, are more or less of the same ilk. Their view on inflation, their view on monetary management, their view on interest rate is pretty much the same. So, yes, it's continuity, but he's perhaps going to be just as hawkish or just as much inflation warrior as Rajan was, and he was indeed criticized for it.
There are always two ways to look at everything. One can say that this is continuity, so the Rajan kind of policies will be the same going forward. But two things I would want to talk about. One is that the need to get inflation well anchored is definitely there. We have just been about 1.5 years into this new monetary policy framework of flexible inflation targeting. It's too early to change the basic structure of this framework. The second point that I want to make is that within that basic framework, there are several ways to play with. Say, for example, till now we have been working with 150 to 200 basis point of real policy rate, which was not giving too much chance for RBI to reduce interest rates. But say, for example, Dr. Patel might be looking at revisiting this real policy rate of 150 to 200 basis point, and that can open up scope for some easing. And last but not the least, things are extremely data dependent. We expect that from here on inflation will be on a declining path, and if that happens, then scope for rate cuts can open up. So while the broad structure remains the same, within that broad structure there is still levers to play with which can impart some amount of flexibility.
That's a fair point indeed. Let the broad structure be the same and invent levers that can get in some amount of flexibility. And I think markets would want Dr. Urjit Patel to send out that signal that he is going to be flexible. But that's a good point that you're bringing to the table. Sajjid, Chinoy, let me bring this to you. You know, Raghuram Rajan took the battle, if I may, to the interest rate cut lobby, to the interest rate cut wallas, as we're calling them. He made no bones about being an inflation warrior. And, you know, he really took it upon himself to rein in prices. Will Urjit Patel continue with the same gusto, do you believe? Or given his reputation of being a hawk, he's perhaps going to be a little more cautious in maintaining that stance?
No, I think the changes have already been made in the RBI Act. It's now the law of the land that the RBI's primary focus will have to be on headline CPI, and the government, by notifying the target of 4%, has sort of laid out a medium-term target for the RBI. So I think the fact that the upper tolerance band is 6%, the medium-term target is 4%, that already provides only a constrained discretion to the central bank. So I think those institutional changes in the last few months already in a way paved the way for what the RBI will have to focus on. So I think, like you mentioned, the team of Governor Rajan and Dr. Patel have been instrumental in this dramatic change. They've been very successful. Inflation has halved in India over the last 2 years, and I don't see why there'd be any change of course, particularly now that these changes have been accepted by the government and have been institutionalized.
All right. It has been institutionalized, and there's far more policy that he will have to institutionalize further. Adi Godrej, how do you see the incoming governor, Dr. Urjit Patel, really balance inflation and growth? It's all right that on the RBI statute, the RBI's mandate is price stability, even though there is going to be a lot of big pressure on him to throw his weight behind growth. How do you see him balance those twin objectives for any economy?
I think he'll be able to do it very well. For one thing, the circumstances are very good. As I mentioned, inflation should be on the wane. I think growth will be good for various other reasons, such as the good monsoon, GST, etc. So balancing the two, which is sometimes very difficult task, will be, to my mind, not a very difficult task now. And Dr. Patel is very well suited to ensure this balance.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, while Raghuram Rajan was perhaps the last independent governor as an individual to take call on interest rates, Dr. Urjit Patel is going to be the first to oversee, and hopefully the first to oversee, a monetary policy committee and its evolution and how that's going to work. What sort of a role are you really expecting the new governor to play as far as monetary policy is concerned? Yes, he's going to have a casting vote, but we all know that policy is indeed steered by the RBI governor, even in his role as a part of the panel.
Well, it might be steered, but he will not have either the veto or will not be individually responsible for conducting that policy. It will be the Monetary Policy Committee. And I think the biggest role that Urjit Patel could perform is to bring to the table of the MPC much better data than what we've had in the past, including on, whether you like headline inflation, CPI, etc., etc. I think the data availability and the quality of the data that is available in this country it requires a lot to be done. And I think the RBI is very well placed. And I have said this for a long time now, that the RBI could play a big role in improving the quality of the data, the consistency of the data. This yo-yo sort of behavior that you get in WPI and CPI with the different components, I think can be improved much further. And what also Urjit can do is to work very closely with the North Bloc to try and address the supply side issues which plague the food inflation. And because food inflation, whether we like it or not, is not amenable to monetary policy instruments, because it is far more dependent on the supply side factors. And this is what Dr. Rajan had also been saying. But I'm afraid he wasn't able to work with the government to identify those, to hone in on those, and then to take those measures which will keep the food inflation down, which will mean that the wage good inflation would be down, and which would mean that this balance that you talked about between growth and inflation, which I like to call as employment generation and inflation, would be much better handled. So the two things that Urjit Patel could do is to, one, improve the quality of the data on which the MPC would determine its policy behavior, and two, work much more closely with different parts of the government to address and to bring down and rein in the food inflation, which is going to be otherwise very difficult, and which will cause him all sorts of problems if he is not able to bring that down and rein that in, because there will be a hue and cry at that point of time. Because if the food inflation continues to rip, it will push the headline inflation, and then the RBI will be in a difficult position to meet its target.
Let's not beat around the bush. And Samiran, I'm going to ask you a very frank question. Given the last inflation figures where they were dangerously close to that, in fact, over that 6% mark, that's over and above the RBI's comfort zone. Is there any elbow room, and is the lobby that wants interest rates cuts and a more benign rate regime, are the arguments really misplaced? And Samiran, the other question that I want to ask you is that Dr. Patel comes from the private sector too. Yes, he does understand, the predicaments of a private sector. He understands what the private sector wants, but the counter argument to that also is he understands that despite whatever he may do with rates, he may not be able to spur the investment rate cycle. So I have two questions coming your way there. Samiran.
Sure. So first on inflation, our sense is that we have reached a near-term peak on inflation. If you look at the internals of inflation, three items, sugar, pulses and veggies, which is 10% of the index, that's causing maximum trouble. The rest of the inflation, 90% of it is only growing at 4.5%. Out of these three, we expect both veggies as well as pulses to come down to single-digit inflation over the next 2 to 3 months. That should open up the door for the headline CPI to inch towards 5% by January 2017. If these views are correct on inflation, then in our mind it opens up space for about 25 to 50 basis point of rate cuts, depending upon how much lower inflation actually goes to. The limited point being that from here on things should be extremely data dependent. If data supports that rate cut, then why not? I am not suggesting for a second, and that's kind of answering the part of your second question, that just 25-50 basis point of rate cut on the margin is going to spur a huge investment boom in this country. There are other problems. I call it the problem of 3 Ds, the problem of debt, default and demand. Unless these three things are sorted out, just interest rate cuts are only going to be somewhat supportive but not the primary driver of investment. But these things will take time. It's just a start that can happen through these initial rate cuts. But to my mind, it's very important to have the inflation credibility intact of RBI. And that's why, unless my inflation view is correct, there should not be any rate cuts just for the sake of supporting growth.
Oh, absolutely, and that's something that I think the new governor will be tested against. Is he going to bow down to the pressure of the growth lobby, or is he going to keep up with the RBI mandate? But you know, the follow-up to that question will come up to Sajjid Chinoy there, because Sajjid, given a reputation that precedes him, which is that he is an inflation warrior, which is that he's uncomfortable with fiscal space, he is a fiscal conservative as well. You know, the question that comes to everybody's mind is, does Urjit Patel have to be more proactive to tell the street, to tell stakeholders that he's going to be flexible, of course, within the long-term policy objectives? Sajjid.
Well, you've already seen that flexibility, right, with Dr. Patel. I mean, I struggle to understand these terms of hawks and doves, because now you've got a legal mandate to keep inflation below 6%. And what you've seen in the last couple of years is the RBI has been very data dependent. When space has opened up for the RBI to ease rates, they have eased rates even outside of policy. And when they've been constrained for space, they've stayed on hold while remaining accommodative. So I don't think that's going to change. I think ultimately the target is now set. And the RBI, has been very data dependent, and I expect under Dr. Patel will continue to be data dependent. And you've seen that he's been the deputy governor in charge of monetary policy, and therefore when space has opened up, we've seen cuts. I expect that to happen in the future. I'm not banking on any cuts right now, only because of where inflation pressures currently are. We've had a good monsoon. We need that to translate into softer food prices. We need to be more certain that the 5% inflation target or forecast for March is achieved, the intermediate target. I think only when there is more confidence that you will undershoot or reach that target will there be space for easing. That was true under Governor Rajan. I think that will be true under Dr. Patel as well.
We do hope it's going to be true under both governors, the outgoing and the incoming one. But let's shift the focus of the debate and talk about the other legacy that Rajan leaves behind. And I think one of the things that he's going to be greatly credited for is calling the bluff of rent-seeking defaulters and forcing banks to go out there, clean up their books. Adi Godrej, do you expect Urjit Patel to follow suit with the same conviction? Or do you believe he needs to tone down things a little bit, given the precarious situation that Indian banks are already in? But the counter argument to that is that he was party to this decision. Can he now change his stance?
No, I don't think he'll change his stance very much. I think the present approach taken by Dr. Rajan was quite pragmatic. It is what the country needs. And I think Dr. Patel will go ahead in that. And that's the best policy for the country.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, I expect you to be more candid than Mr. Godrej has been on that answer. And so I must ask you this question, that Raghuram Rajan did force banks to recognize the holes in their balance sheets. And in a lot of ways, he did take on the tycoons there. And a lot of people believe that along with his plain speaking, quote unquote, did his ouster in many ways. My question to you is, do you believe Urjit Patel will maintain the same stance on NPS because he was party to the decision? Because that's going to be the real test for Urjit Patel. What does he do with bad loans? Or do you believe he needs to scale down that fight a little, and he perhaps will?
You know, taking on the tycoons and exposing the cronies is not the same thing as handling the bank NPAs, more judiciously. I'm afraid I had not agreed with Dr. Rajan's, Rajan's approach of cleaning up the balance sheets in the shortest possible time, because my fear was that here was a patient on the operation table, and that you just might, let him die before you cured him. So I think because of his private sector background, because of his greater empathy towards towards the investors and to the honest investors, not to the tycoons and not to the cronies, Urjit could well be a bit more sympathetic to taking a longer business cycle wide approach towards cleaning the NPAs. And my suggestion here has been to treat stocks and flows differently. My suggestion has been, yes, we will take up the stocks as they should be taken up and get the defaulters and the willful defaulters to pay up, but we will somehow take measures to improve the flows of investment for the potential honest investor. And for that reason, I think, one, to improve the transmission mechanism. That will be very important, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, because the transmission mechanism is broke, and the lending rates don't come down in line with the repo rates or the deposit rates. The SLR limits have to be tackled, have to be brought down, maybe abolished as far as I'm concerned. They have no role at this point of time in the banking industry. And also, maybe what Mr. Patel could do working with the government is to have a much better structured program of recapitalization of banks, so that they are able to, in some sense, take a sigh, take a breath of relief, that they have some more capital to play with, which they can then lend to the honest, and I emphasize the word honest, and entrepreneurial investor, because the way we had gone so far in the last year, I was certain that that our investment cycle would turn turtle. It had already turned very weak, and that would have been the end of the story for employment generation, and perhaps a very high cost to pay for the economy.
Right. I'm still wondering if interest rates were more benign, would people invest? I mean, that's also the other part of that argument. But I'm running out of time here, and I need to ask quick questions. And Samiran, this question is really coming your way. A lot of people believe that it should be business as usual. And why should markets react to an announcement being made on Mint Street or in North Block? But markets usually do. They were quiet today. There was not such a big crest, not such a trough. The bond, the equity, the rupee did stay quiet. Is that what you expect markets to be, or is this really they're trying to read Urjit Patel's mind before they begin to react?
Well, if you look back at last 5 RBI governors' terms, there has been a lot of differences in approach to monetary policy, approach to exchange rate policy, approach to banking sector reforms. So it's unlikely that Dr. Patel's regime will be just a Xerox copy of what Dr. Rajan's regime has been. So there would be, for obvious reasons, differences. But at this moment, the market does not know enough to judge in which direction those changes are going to come from. So once Dr. Patel probably lays down his vision for next 3 months to next 3 years, I think that's the time when market will try to figure out which way to move. At this moment, it's more of a wait and watch.
All right, more of a wait and watch. Sajjid, Chinoy, where do you see, Samiran is right. I think the markets are trying to read what Urjit Patel does. Is he going to live up to his reputation, or is he going to be far more benign than markets are expecting him to be? But Sajjid, the question is, he has a lot of global credentials. I mean, I know Governor Rajan had this rock star status, and I'm going to ask that question next to Adi Godrej, but he had a lot of global credentials too. How is the overseas investor community really looking at his appointment?
Well, I think the early reaction has been extremely positive. And I think the reason there was so much sort of interest this time around is because we moved to a brand new framework. And the question was, will that framework change with the appointment of a new governor, or will we see a continuation, a much needed continuation of that framework? And I think 3 steps. 1, the amendments to the RBI Act. Second, the notification of the 4% inflation target. And third, the fact that the very author of that report and that framework and the existing deputy governor is the new governor provides a lot of confidence and reassurance to the global community that what you've seen in the last 3 years in terms of a new framework in the fight on inflation, on transmission, is not a flash in the pan. It is a new regime shift that this government has firmly adopted and wants to take to its logical conclusion. So I think global investors would be are already have taken this news very well.
All right, so as I wrap this up, I've just got exactly 2 minutes on the show, and Adi Godrej, if I may ask you, Governor Rajan's Indianness or his un-Indianness was a part of much public dialogue, at least towards the end. Given the global credentials that Urjit Patel enjoys and can boast of, and equally so as far as Governor Rajan was concerned, do you see resentment against him too? Because there were voices of concerns that were coming in from the political class against Rajan. Could those similar voices be voiced now?
First of all, it shouldn't have been an issue in the case of Dr. Rajan, and it wasn't from a political class. It was just, I think, one person, and I don't think that's an issue.
All right, that's true. I mean, there should never have been a question of having that, having had that debate. But I must ask you, if you actually read what has been written after Raghuram Rajan decided to go away and after Urjit Patel has been appointed, there was almost this rock star status that Raghuram Rajan, employed, from being called as a Bond on Mint Street, a larger-than-life image. He was speaking on issues outside monetary policy that finally did not do him good. But Urjit, in comparison, is far more low profile. And do you believe that's going to work for him, which did not for Rajan? Mr. Godrej.
Well, I wouldn't call it rock star status, but it's a very important position. And I think Dr. Rajan lent it great status, both in India and outside. He was very well respected outside. And I think it helped India's economy stabilize.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, there was a lot of speculation, and I'm letting you have the last word on this show. There was a lot of speculation when Rajan decided to return that the government has compromised the independence and the autonomy of the central bank and not stood up and spoken about voices that were personal attacks that were coming against the governor. But where do you stand on things today? Do you believe that by appointing Urjit Patel and by ensuring continuity and by getting a person with global credentials, the government has tried to also send out a signal that they are ready to keep the fiercely independent RBI as just that, autonomous, fiercely independent and free?
I don't think the RBI autonomy is an issue at all. And as Sajjid has been saying, now there is a new legal framework in which the government and the RBI have decided to work together to achieve a particular target. And I think therefore what we should expect, what I think the government is trying to signal is that in appointing Dr. Urjit Patel, they will, as I said earlier, there is policy predictability, and yet at the same time they are appointing a team member who will be a team member and not therefore as much of a public intellectual as his predecessor was, because I think the two don't gel together, because the RBI governor's position is such that his inputs will have to be critical, but they have to be done in a manner in which the team, the entire Government of India team, of which RBI is an integral part, will play a role or will converge towards achieving the very important targets of generating employment and keeping inflation in control.
All right, on that last word, I'll have to wrap up things here, but there's something interesting that I read in The Economist, and I think it's only fair that we end with that statement. And it said, because Urjit Patel and Raghuram Rajan are such close of each other, why did the government not choose to keep the original? But that's the debate for another day. And I think today, Dr. Urjit Patel, who has been appointed as the 24th RBI governor, has credentials under him, has a reputation that precedes him, and he will indeed, perhaps like Dr. Kumar and everybody else has been saying on this show, sail the ship through for the next 3 years. Of course, the bigger question is, why could he not be given 5 to begin with? But on that note, thank you very much, Mr. Adi Godrej, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Samiran Chakraborty and Sajjid Chinoy for joining us on this very special edition, The Chosen One, and that indeed is Urjit Patel.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.